This training is made possible by a grant from the Utah State Charter School Board. On behalf of the Utah Association of Public Charter Schools, welcome to this quick training on budgeting. This training will cover the law that governs your school's budget, provide an overview of the functions of a budget, and then provide 7 easy steps for getting your budget right. 53G-7-303 is a Utah Code section titled LEA Governing Board Budget Procedures. It is the law that governs public school budgets. It is short and simple, but has a lot of directive within. The section outlines 6 very specific requirements: 2 roles, 2 dates, and 2 places. Let's look at each. In this code, 2 roles are identified and defined. First is the budget officer. For a charter school, this simply means an individual selected by the charter school governing board. According to BizFluent, a budget officer is a trained professional who works to keep the budget balanced for a company over a set period. The budget officer is often expected to plan and make changes to the budget if it needs to improve over time. In real life, the budget officer is most likely your business manager working alongside your director. Second is the LEA governing board. For a charter school, this means the charter school governing board. Also in the code are 2 dates. The code reads, for a charter school before June 30th of each year, a charter school governing board shall adopt a budget for the next fiscal year. So date number 1 is June 30th. Do you have to wait until June 30th to adopt the budget? Nope. But as we will discuss later, do not wait until June to start budgeting. The second date is July 30th. Although the code reads, within 30 days of adopting a budget, an LEA governing board shall file a copy. So your staff could file on July 1st if they want, but the law allows 30 days. On July 31st, your school is late. Finally, the law gives 2 places where the budget must be filed. The wording from the code is, an LEA governing board shall file a copy of the adopted budget with the state auditor and the state board, meaning the state school board. This is done electronically and is almost always uploaded by the business manager. But as the code calls out the board, it is the board's responsibility to make sure this happens. Why is a budget so important? A well-formulated budget allows for the best use of limited resources and focuses on the primary goals and objectives of the organization. The process of building a budget is fundamentally a planning process. A budget is a financial document that provides an overview of how the school is planning to spend its money. It is essentially the financial reflection that you expect the school to accomplish over the year. Once adopted, the budget also becomes a financial management tool helpful in monitoring ongoing activities. With each financial report, the board compares actual performance against the plan. At its core, a budget is a tool to safeguard resources, focus and plan the spending for the year, and monitor the school's financial goals. Let's talk about mission, vision, and values. Think about your own school's particular focus. Whether your school is Montessori, STEM, or arts-focused, a well-crafted budget can help the school achieve the charter's stated purpose, and it should align with the goals in the charter. When the board approves a budget, it should be centered around the primary goals of the organization. If I'm at a tech-focused school, my budget may reflect the goal to have one-on-one technology. If I'm an outdoor education-focused school, my field trip budget should probably be fairly large. And if I was looking at a PE-focused school's budget, what might I expect to see? What about a STEM school? The budget plays a key role in forcing the board to prioritize the school's direction. If you want to know what an organization values, track where it spends its money and time. A budget can help determine those expenditures and activities that are most critical for fulfilling the mission. The budget is a first step in allowing the board to help get people all rowing in the same direction by setting spending limits, keeping costs in line with revenues, and grow reserves by using current resources to the maximum. The budget makes a strong statement about the organization's intentions and plans, as it indicates what the board is focused on in the coming year or years. If you do not plan your budget strategically, then your school may not be able to deliver its mission. Let's talk about 7 easy steps for budgeting. No, really, there's just 7 simple and easy steps to budget in a way which will create a greater chance of success. These are tried and true methods. I want you to think back to program accounting. You'll want to be thinking about this as a big piece of budgeting. If you get the budget right based on the goals of the school and keep the funds distributed accurately in the budget, everything else will fall into place. Step 1, start early. School budgeting takes time, especially if you're new to it. Give yourself enough time to gather the necessary information and data, to think through and discuss the various elements of the budget, think programs, and time to put it down on paper or in Excel. Don't rush the budgeting process. Start working on the budget a couple of months in advance of the June 30th due date so you have sufficient time to get input from relevant stakeholders before presenting the budget at the June board meeting. You may even want to have a goal for early June so that if revisions need to be made, you're not scrambling. Step 2, follow a process. Make sure that you clearly determine the roles and decision-making processes that will yield the most effective information gathering, analysis, and decision-making. Additionally, determine a timeline that ensures approval prior to the June 30th date. There is not one perfect process for every group, but basically you need to outline how you want that process and timeline to look. Some things to think about. Do you want the board's finance committee involved? Do you want the director to do a draft before bringing it to a group? If so, who is that group? Do you want the business manager to create a spreadsheet based on the legislative estimate and then have the director give priorities and goals and they work together before bringing it to the board? Working back from early June, when would you want your director to start thinking of budgets? Hiring happens in the spring, so how will the director know how much they can spend on salary offers? When do you want to have the first budget meeting? Pro tip, once a process and timeline are established, mark the events in everyone's calendars so that it becomes easier to repeat the process each year and so that board members plan to be there for all meetings involving the budget. Think about the main purpose of your budget and think about a structure that will best support that purpose. The state has a format that your business manager will use to upload, but you can always deviate from that in the operations and planning stage and use what works for your school. Budgeting should be a part of your school's organizational culture, something everyone is aware of and contributes to. Step 3. Before starting with what is, essentially a future-oriented process, clarify the present context and review data so you don't operate on assumptions. Assess current financial decisions. Analyze current year-end forecast, current budget variances, and balance sheet strength. Then take some time to reflect on and learn from programmatic and financial successes and failures. Identify opportunities, threats, emerging trends likely to influence your activities. Finally, get clear on and name the goals, organizational values, and priorities that you want to have reflected in this year's budget. It's also useful to look at the financial trends for your various programs over the past few years and assess if each program is covering its direct costs. If you're a new school, this is a little harder, but not impossible. Use neighboring, similar sized, and similar mission schools' budgets, allotment memos, and reports. All are available on the school finance website, going back several years. While there will inevitably be some assumptions in your budget, try to work with real numbers as much as possible. Use last year's numbers as a starting place and include any quotes from vendors or partners. If you're creating a budget for the first time, create as reasonable a list as possible of expenses. Then assess your best and worst case scenarios for funding. Pro tip: when including assumptions, write them down in a separate document or use the comment feature. This way, when someone asks about a number in the budget, you can easily explain it. It's important to the success of your programs that your revenue and expense estimates are realistic. While there is generally space at a school for hopes and dreams, when it comes to budgeting, there isn't. When putting in the numbers, make sure you know exactly where your funds will come from and that the expenses match the rules. Program accounting starts at the budget. Step 4, include the right amount of detail. This one can be tricky to get right, but practice makes perfect. There should be enough lines in your budget to provide for a comprehensive understanding of the financial situation. However, the budget should be high-level enough so as not to be cluttered and overwhelming. For example, salaries, all the 100 object code, should be broken out by function, admin versus teacher versus counselor, but not by individual person. For example, 2 administrators at $150,000, 22 teachers at $300,000, 2 school counselors at $120,000, not Bob $75,000, Sally $50,000, etc. A budget should be a tool that supports sound decision making, allowing leaders to make good decisions fast. Pro tip: remember the chart of accounts, which classifies the source of revenue and the types of expenses you incur? Use those same categories in your budget to easily plan, generate financial reports, and monitor. It will also ensure that you are complying with program accounting. Step 5, get your income right. Revenue can be one of the more difficult parts of developing a budget simply because it's hard to forecast enrollment a year ahead of time, which is what drives the legislative estimate. But use the legislative estimate provided because this is what you will be funded on in July. If you know the estimate is wrong, say you're budgeted for 700 students, but you're only opening with 500, then write the budget for 495 and save that money for when the state pulls back its funds. If the estimate is close, use the number provided, even though you'll still want to be conservative and give yourself a cushion. You will be funded for every student you educate, but since that could be paid much later in the year, you need to be able to meet your expenses, even if not all students are funded at the beginning. Also, recall that federal money is reimbursement-based, so you'll have to cover those expenses at the beginning. Plan for that as you budget. Don't forget to track restricted and unrestricted funds and how you are spending them. This is critical. Let me say that again. Don't forget to track restricted and unrestricted funds and how you are spending them. Pro tip: you can list all your revenue sources and mark them as U or R, and then link those to the expenses you anticipate those revenues covering. You can double check that the funds are being used in accordance with the program rules. Step 6, figure out expense. List expenses in high-level categories by object: salaries, budgets, supplies, etc. Keep in mind the difference between fixed and variable costs when you're tracking expenses. Fixed costs remain constant. They include items such as rent, loan repayments, and insurance. Variable costs are directly tied to running the school program, increasing or decreasing and changing with enrollment, like staffing and supplies. Since you have some control over these expenses, this is where a lot of decision-making will happen. Don't forget about cash flow projections. This is the budget of revenues received and expenses paid, broken down monthly to ensure cash will be there when needed. Many of your expenses will occur in the first 3 months of the school year, with the true-up in the winter and federal revenue in the spring. The school may be unable to pay expenses unless it has built up a large cash surplus. Plan your cash flows as well as your revenues and expenses. Some school leaders are reluctant to show a surplus in their books, fearing the perception that they are not putting their resources to a good use. But there's a place for a surplus in the budgets too. Reserves are critical to your school's long-term sustainability. They can mean the difference between surviving a rough patch and being forced to close. Budgeting for a surplus allows you to support future innovations and invest in your staff. The goal is to avoid never having enough to invest resources in infrastructure or having an overhead that is too lean to effectively run the school. Your annual unrestricted surplus should be sufficient to meet debt obligations, fund depreciation, and add to operating reserves. Step 7. Monitor. Budgets are too often proposed, discussed, accepted, and forgotten. Don't fall into that trap. Remember, a budget is a financial plan, but it is also a tool to assess accountability related to spending, ensure any new goals or programs are making expected progress, learn more about trends and other deviations that may impact future operations, and finally demonstrate transparency by sharing findings from this regular monitoring. Make sure your monthly financial reports compare the predicted budgeted numbers to the actual figures in order to look for differences and establish why they occurred. Ask questions, get data. When your organization is not in line with the budget, you should look at why and what factors you can control or change. Is this a timing issue? Has the school met the requirements associated with a fund? How does this compare to last year or last period? Is this a one-time issue or potentially ongoing? Do we need a change in policy or practice? When leadership is willing to dig into the numbers, the budget becomes an effective management and operations tool, allowing for a better overview, more speedy addressing of potential issues, more nimble management, and a more informed decision-making process. Good communication between the director, business manager, and the board are key to monitoring the budget during the year. Without an annual budget, besides being out of compliance with state law, you're essentially operating in the dark and could easily overspend, spend restricted money erroneously, or rack up debt you can't repay. Worst, you could end up having to close your doors. In addition to learning about the 2 roles, the 2 dates, and the 2 places the law outlines for your school budget, 7 steps to budgeting were provided. These 7 steps are fundamentals of sound budgeting for your school. Leading a school is a constant balancing act. School administrators must continuously balance the current needs and demands of internal and external stakeholders, short-term priorities, and long-term vision. For that, financial leadership is key. Financial leadership starts with a strong, data-based budget. A strong budget helps you adapt to the demands of the changing environment and maintain the balance needed for mission impact and sustained financial health. We hope this budgeting overview has been helpful and wish you the best in governing your school.